The 2026 NFL offseason has moved last year's baseline projections into irrelevance. Rosters have been reshaped with new personnel and coaching shifts. Significant moves like Mike Evans joining San Francisco or Aaron Rodgers landing in Pittsburgh mean that the 2025 production trends no longer apply to these specific offensive units. This creates a difficult choice for fantasy managers. You have to decide whether to pay a premium for these newly assembled super teams or hunt for value in the legacy systems that the market is ignoring. Chasing high-visibility trades without checking the underlying stability of the system often leads to overpaying for production that may never materialize. To navigate this, we use an ROI framework. This chart plots acquisition cost against the probability of reliable yield. We're measuring how much capital you spend to acquire a team's statistical output. Every offense falls into 3 tiers: toxic traps, discounted value, and price to perfection. This matrix shows where the numbers support a heavy investment and where the risk suggests you should walk away from the table. Prioritizing draft capital efficiency is the most reliable way to manage the high variance we're seeing across the 2026 landscape. We start with toxic ROI. These are teams that command high draft capital, but offer unpredictable weekly scoring floors in return. The New England Patriots are a primary example. Despite trading for A.J. Brown, the internal instability within the organization makes their projected statistical output highly volatile. Reports of locker room fractures surrounding Mike Vrabel suggest a lack of cohesion that typically limits a team's offensive efficiency. The situation in Atlanta is similarly risky. The Falcons are operating with a split quarterback room between Tua Tagovailoa and Michael Penix. When the quarterback play is this fragmented, the target distribution becomes impossible to project. You end up with a wide receiver room where no single player has a reliable weekly volume. The Baltimore Ravens are also entering this territory. They've experienced a significant talent drain that the fantasy market hasn't fully factored into their current draft cost. The loss of key starters forces Lamar Jackson to operate behind a less stable pocket, which historically limits his rushing upside. Prioritizing name recognition in these unstable environments introduces a level of variance that often makes it difficult to maintain a competitive weekly floor. Next, we look at discounted value. These are mid-tier offenses that offer elite production potential at a much lower acquisition cost. The Tennessee Titans are a standout here. Under Brian Daboll, they've implemented a new system for quarterback Cam Ward that leans into modern, high-efficiency passing. With Wan'Dale Robinson and Carnell Tate, with Calvin Ridley, the Titans are building a system centered on a higher frequency of passing routes. We see a similar trend line with the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams is entering his 4th year with a highly optimized receiving core and an offensive coordinator setup designed for volume. The broader market is undervaluing the Bears system. They are currently producing numbers that rival the elite offenses, but their players are still available in the middle rounds of most drafts. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers provide another stable option. Despite the loss of Mike Evans, they maintain a system that has historically produced WR1 numbers at a much lower price tag. Investing here requires you to handle some early season uncertainty, as these new systems establish their rhythm during the first few weeks. However, securing high-ceiling players at these mid-round valuations is the most effective way to build the roster depth needed for a deep playoff run. Finally, we have the priced to perfection tier. These are high-performing ecosystems where you have to spend premium first-round capital just to get in the door. The Denver Broncos are the prime example. They operate at a high level, but there is zero margin for error at their current draft price. Much of that value is tied to Bo Nix's health. If his ankle rehabilitation timeline faces any setbacks, the high-cost investment in players like Jalen Waddle becomes much harder to justify. In Kansas City, you're paying for Patrick Mahomes' elite status while also taking on the risk associated with his ACL recovery. The Philadelphia Eagles also fall into this category. Devonta Smith is projected for massive volume in their new system, but you have to pay a career-high price to draft him. The risk here is the lack of a safety net. When you exhaust your early picks on these premium assets, you have very little capital left to address other needs on your roster. Because these elite assets take up so much of your draft capital, a multi-week injury to just one of them forces you to find first-round production on the waiver wire. Paying maximum price for these ceilings means accepting significant risk to your season's floor if any single variable doesn't go according to plan. To survive 2026, you have to match these specific team profiles to your own roster's needs and your personal risk tolerance. If you are looking for consistency and a high floor, the data suggests prioritizing the Rams, Eagles, and Cowboys. These teams offer stability, with established offensive lines and play callers who maintain a reliable statistical output. If your roster is rebuilding and you need to maximize upside, target the high variance potential of the Bears, Texans, and Titans. Identifying where your team sits in its competitive life cycle is the necessary first step before you decide which tier to invest in. To summarize, you need a clear list of teams to avoid due to internal friction and limited upside. The Patriots and Falcons are currently toxic environments for fantasy production. You should let other managers take on that risk, regardless of where those players fall in the draft. Instead, focus your efforts on the mid-tier value targets like Tennessee and Chicago to maximize your potential return. The most effective strategy for 2026 is to filter out the noise of blockbuster trades and focus strictly on where the offensive volume is guaranteed. Success this season comes from exploiting the market's overreaction to hype and securing the systems that offer the most reliable path to production.